Bruce originally from Cheltenham, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Cheltenham. He graduated from Anglia Ruskin University in 2002, having studied information systems. He's travelled extensively around the world, and I suppose he would describe himself as a human origins researcher. Would that be right?
One of them, yeah.
Okay, amongst other things, yeah. His research has been featured in the Telegraph newspaper and a popular Science Channel show. He's also been interviewed Coast to Coast Radio, Midnight in the Desert. He's a member of both the Paleoanthropology Society, easy for you to say, and the Scientific and Medical Network. I'll say a little bit about Daniella as well, because she's from Sydney, Australia, correct? And graduated from West Sydney University. She's an equine genetics expert. I'm embarrassed now, a psychic medium, a cartomancer, yeah, a healer, a shaman, a hypnotherapist, and everything else. Between them, they've written a number of books, including Ancient Aliens in Australia, 2012 Rising, The Forgotten Exodus, and Hybrid Humans. Now, Hybrid Humans uses scientific evidence to describe how Homo sapiens are indeed an alien hybrid species, and this is what they're going to discuss this evening. So I bored you enough now, so please put your hands together, give a warm welcome for Bruce Fenton. Thank you.
Thank you for coming along to listen, and hopefully you'll enjoy some of this. Some weird stuff. You know, I won't kid you about that. There's some weird stuff in it. So, this is obviously the latest of our books, and it. Sorry. Okay, is that better? Yeah. Builds on the earlier ones. Basically, I'm going to give you a quick background to how we got to this, because it's some pretty full-on stuff. So, pop to the next slide, and I will give you a bit of background. In 2011, I travelled to Egypt, and that's my view from the Sphinx guest house in Egypt, which is an incredible view, as you can see. You can't get much closer to the site without actually being with that crowd. It's also the place where a lot of the famous researchers stay. You know, you'll find that Val and Hancock and all these people have stayed there at some point. This was kind of the tail end of a journey for me, because I've been a 2012 Mayan calendar expert and speaker for several years, from about 2007. Very involved with that, met all the people that were famous within that subject, you know, and travelled to Mexico and all sorts. This was a kind of a change of tactics. I came out at the end of a period of research into that, and the end of a business and marriage, all sorts of upheavals, and it took me to a journey to Egypt on the 11/11/11. Now, whilst there, some quite incredible things happened. If we go to the next slide, I will tell you about some of that. I went to one site that was particularly special. Now, this is Abu Ghorab. What you see there is an alabaster platform, perfectly smooth, looks machine cut, very unusual. There's not another one that I know of in Egypt like this. Now, if you have a look at the next slide, you'll see a bit of a close-up of what it looks like on top. Right? So you have this circle in the middle, and this has been described by the researcher William Henry as a stargate site, and he believes this platform is connected to stargate technologies. Right? Now, this site is off limits to tourists, so in true Egyptian tradition, it takes a little bit of backsheesh. You have to pay somebody to get in there. If you can arrange that, though, it's a marvellous site. You know, most of the temple complex there looks like it's been blown up. I mean, it's a very strange place. You get the sense that it's been deliberately destroyed for some reason, and that it's incredibly ancient. Now, there's a star map on the ground in Egypt which matches with the sky. Now, the as above, so below system of the ancient Egyptians. Now, if you were to look at the star map overlaid over the sites of Egypt, you'll find that Abu Ghorab and nearby structures are overlaid over the Pleiades. Right? Whereas, of course, we have the three pyramids which are overlaid with Orion. So this is very, very interesting site for that reason, because the Pleiades form, you know, a very key role in ancient mythology around the world, you know, not least in Egypt, but you'll find they're mentioned, you know, as Aboriginals, the Sumerians, you go around the world, Indonesia, Japan, everywhere. So it's one of these key areas of the sky that keeps coming up in ancient mythology. Now, whilst there, I had a very strange experience. I found that, for some reason, I was compelled to, after having been on the platform, I was compelled to kind of look up at the sky. This was at night, and I was looking at the Pleiades. Now, I'm not one of those people that's been, you know, kind of the New Age kind of thing of that, you know, there's all these, you know, federations and whatnot. So it was quite strange to find myself there looking up and feeling that there was beings there, and that I was in some way communicating to them, and quite emotionally saying, you know, why have you left us on this planet? You know, why don't you come back and help? You know, there's all these problems here, and I'm quite upset. Came out of nowhere, and I say, you know, I didn't have that kind of leaning in my research in the past. And then after that, nothing immediately happened. So we'll go on to the next slide, but it becomes relevant later. Another place I went to in Egypt was under Egypt. Now, this cave is actually out in the desert near the pyramids. Now, this is a complex, part of a complex, where you go out and you'll find that there's some very strange, what look like concrete bunkers out in the desert. Now, these again are off limits. In fact, I don't know any pictures of the structures. I can't find any pictures that have been taken. I couldn't unfortunately get any images myself because the flash photography I would have needed would have alerted people to the fact that we were out there, and we were actually taken out there by Egyptian police. So, I mean, you can imagine they're not supposed to be taking us up there either. So we have to be quite careful. But you descend down steps into this bunker complex, and then you climb down one of these, I don't know if anyone's been out to Egypt, they may see that these square tunnel systems that go down all around the shafts around the sites. And some of these go down into an underground complex. Now, of course, that's not really supposed to exist. Hawass, and a lot of people will say that there's nothing to see under the Giza Plateau, but my feeling is that there is some kind of a survival complex that's been built under the desert there, because the feeling you get as you go in there is this is some kind of, as I say, a survival area, bunker system. You go down, and then there's these tunnels you can crawl into, which seem to be natural tunnels that have been extended in places. And the guy who was with us tells us that if you crawl along there and keep going for a while, you'll get to some additional shafts, which you can't see the bottom. He's dropped, you know, flaming brands down there to see. And he said they go down so deep that the only way you'll get down there is with professional climbing equipment. Now, what is that doing out in the middle of the desert, you know, in a strange bunker? So there's some very strange experiences we had and very interesting sites we went to whilst out there. Now, on to the next slide, I will show you something else. Now, I had an interesting encounter as well with an object. Now, this came up from a site that was excavated secretly out in an area not far from the pyramids. There is basically under the entire village next to the pyramid site, there are ancient temple complexes. Now, this is quite well understood. The problem is that, of course, that being that there are now houses there, it's very difficult for anyone to excavate. Some people do, you know, they dig under their houses, they dig under the roads, you know, at night and whatnot, and people find things. Now, this is a particularly interesting object because this came up from a dig. The person who was involved was not really looking for something like this. They were interested in, you know, treasures, right? So to everyone who was there, this was nothing, it was thrown to the side. However, I had a very strong feeling this was something important. So I asked him, you know, is it right if I spend some time with this object? Now, I know a little bit about what this is now, but at the time I really didn't. I just felt it was important. And I'd asked a couple of psychics that I know if they would zone in on it and tell me everything about it. And what they came out with initially, one of them told me some kind of beacon, another one said a key that, you know, opens something somewhere. And separately, I asked my friend at the time, Daniella, if she would zone in on it as well. She wasn't with me then. And she sort of told me the similar thing. She actually described what I was holding. She's a very good remote viewer. Told me what I was holding, told me a little bit about the object. Now, I now understand that this was key to a lot of events that are to come, because we'll be talking about another strange stone in a little bit, which really is crucial to the new book. So, go on to the next slide. Now, I came back from Egypt, and it turned out my ex-wife was not very happy with our divorce, and started making a lot of problems for me. So, at that point, someone leapt in and offered me a job. Can you go to the next slide? This person came along and helped me. Said, look, I've got a job in Spain for you. You know, if you want to get out of the situation you've got going there, which was very unpleasant, you can join me over in Spain and do some English teaching. So I left the UK, and that was kind of the start of my adventures. So if we can go on to the next slide. And the next thing I knew, within a couple of weeks, she decided she was off to Ecuador, where she has a family of her home, and asked, did I want to come along? That's a bit of a common reason why she was going to Ecuador, but I won't go into all the personal details. But so I decided I would go to Ecuador with her, and we ended up in Chungaragua, and that is the volcano in the background there. And some very strange things started happening once we reached Ecuador. Now, there was a night, probably about 2 weeks into our arrival, where we sat down. We'd had a fairly normal evening. Daniella and I had a couple of drinks together in the kitchen, and Daniella started feeling very unwell. Now, she's been a medium, channel, psychic, all of her life, so I'll preface that because some very strange things happened. She went up to bed, feeling very unwell, lay down, and then started being quite sick, and then a lot of pain, and basically passed out. Now, to me, it looked like obviously she was just unconscious on the bed, but it was not quite what was happening for her. Instead, she felt that her whole body had been torn apart and that she had passed through the wall, gone through some kind of barrier. At this point, she finds herself standing in a structure, kind of domed structure. Along with her are a number of beings, very tall, human-like beings that are having a meeting. Now, this meeting is quite a strange one, because they're talking about things that are going to happen on this planet, things that are happening on this planet, things that remind me a lot of the Holy prophecies and ancient Egyptian prophecies and whatnot. So when Danny started to sort of come back out of it, and I asked her, did she remember having any strange experiences, and she kind of filled me in on, what she'd seen. Of course, all I saw was her looking a bit unwell and being unconscious. I did hear her mumbling, in her sleep, mumbling away something, about this conversation. So I got parts of it, but she filled me in on, the rest of it. And so, at that point, we kind of understood something very strange was obviously going on. And these beings were clearly not fully human. Some of them were obviously just too tall, they were giants. Now, it started to click a little bit after this began, that, that when I was in Egypt, I had actually called out to these beings, in the site, the Stargate site, saying, why have you left us here, why didn't you come back, and whatnot. So, I now understand that I'd kind of made an invitation. Right? Unfortunately, Danny seems to be the one who'd had to put up with the discomfort of that. And then every few days after that, she would find herself taken again. And during these other events, what I call sort of shamanic journeys, she would find herself not in this meeting with these beings, but instead would be taken back to a Mayan city, right, Palenque, in the 7th century, living a second life there. Bizarre as you can get with these experiences, she would be in the presence of Lord Pakal. And if anyone knows the work of Eric von Daniken and the lid of Pakal, it's also been made famous in his book, Chariots of the Gods. Pakal is the guy on the lid. He was the Lord of Palenque in the 7th century, and it's been, over the years, many people have suspected that there's an alien element to his story, which we obviously would confirm. Now, during these journeys, she found herself not only in the presence of what would be hybrids, kind of human hybrids, extremely tall, these lords of Palenque. If you ever want to check this out for yourselves, you can have a look at pictures of, I would highlight images in the Temple of the Foliated Cross, particularly at Palenque, because you'll see there images of beings who are incredibly tall, being served by these very normal Mayans who are about 5 foot tall typically, and they're standing on boxes. Boxes about that high, and you'll see in the imagery that the lords are still another sort of head and shoulders above them, despite this. These are abnormally tall people, and this is recognised, you can see in the artwork, but of course historians will tell you, well, they're probably just using a little bit of artistic licence. Now, from the first-hand accounts that I have, I would say that they're very accurate. Now, underneath the city, there's a whole other thing going on. There's a tunnel system, there's chambers with experiments going on, really strange things happening. Now, whether you want to take these experiences in some way a vision or as being projected by the beings. We can't say for sure, but what we can say is that Daniella experienced them as totally immersed, totally like three-dimensional, real, vivid experiences in which she felt that she was there. So that's where I look at it, is that we can't say how they happened, we can't really say what the phenomena is exactly, if it's some kind of astral thing, past life thing, time travel. It's very hard to say. So what we can say is that some of the things that she learned there have proven to be accurate. Now, for example, we wrote a book in 2012 called 2012 Rising the Last Soul Kin. Now, in that we described this tunnel system and that there's water flowing through it and other elements, calendars down there, there's all sorts of strange things. In 2014, a ground-penetrating radar survey was done at Alcheringa, and they found that at the front of the Temple of Inscriptions, which is Pekao's main temple, there is a network of 9 channels that radiates out underneath the ground. There's these channels of water in these tunnel systems, which were unknown to that point. Now, they were known to everyone else, obviously, but not to us. On top of that, there were some other people down there, and they were not normal people, because she noticed that apart from there being these Pleiadian hybrids, who were strange enough, very tall, very agile, very strong, unlike the normal Mayan humans, that there were also tall, grey, long-headed, large-eyed beings down there, which now today we know as the tall greys. They seemed to be helped by another race of short greys. And the things that they were doing down there were fairly horrific. There was experiments being done on the local people, there were children being taken down there, they were harvesting cells, seemed to be some skin cells that they were using to grow artificial skins to try and blend in some way. Now, in our opinion, it's very unlikely they could ever blend in because they're about 2.5 meters tall, so it's a strange project that they're involved in. On top of that, there is separately another area that she sees in which humans are being modified, having things put into their brains, which seems to be something to do with making them into better warriors. There's a kind of an upgrade to create this race of better fighters for some kind of conflict that is obviously suspected to be coming. We don't know the ins and outs of all that, but she saw some very, very uncomfortable, very strange things in these experiences, whether they're visionary or real. We pop on to the next slide. Now, whilst I was in Ecuador, there were some other things that came up that were rather bizarre. One of them is that I became involved with a group of people that had recently discovered a lost city in the Amazon jungles of Ecuador. This is out in an area called the Yanganatis, and the Yanganatis is considered to be pretty much the most, as I understand it, the most dangerous jungles in South America. It's famous for the lost treasures of the Inca, which are believed to be hidden somewhere in this region. It's very difficult to enter into. It's swampy, extreme temperatures, very cold at night, obviously quite hot in the day. It's got there's drops that are hidden, there's marshes, mountains, not an easy place to go into. But a group of adventurers had recently returned from a discovery there. We happened to be at a meeting with them because of a mutual contact, a shaman that we had to see about something, said, well look, hey, can you come along the same day as some friends of mine, so I think you might find them interesting. Turns out that they'd literally just come back. They told me that they believed it was a lost city of giants, which got my attention, being that I'm into anything strange. So I said to them, well, okay, let's tell us a bit more about it. So they filled me in. They said that they'd found giant hammers and all sorts of strange artifacts that didn't match any of the known cultures of Ecuador. Nobody's supposed to live in the Yanganatis. Again, it's very difficult territory. I arranged a later date to go in. At first, I tried to work with the Ecuadorian government. I got involved with them. Daniella, fortunately, has a relative who has been quite a senior in the archaeology sort of networks there and in the military. He managed to arrange a meeting. We were picked up by the Ecuadorian patrimonial police, taken to a meeting in their main offices in Quito. Quite an experience. All sorts of strange things in their artifacts and whatnot. Some of them looking incredibly like Egyptian headdresses. The snake at the top, all this. These are indigenous artwork. And you immediately, if you've got the eyes to see, you can see that there's a strange link between ancient Egypt and the Ecuadorian ancient cultures. And during this meeting, they agreed that this was definitely a site of interest, that there was something special here. And if you go on to the next slide, you'll see That's myself out there. This is basically an enormous wall-like structure that's out in the middle of nowhere in the jungles. Huge blocks, rather like those you'll see in Peru at some of the sites there, these polygonal, megalithic blocks. It's pretty steep. You probably can't quite get the angle there, but you could slide down and severely injure yourself. It's about 80 metres up at that point. You see sort of where it gets more bushy in the background there. We went into that area and cleared, and if you go to the next slide, you'll see, right, you see these blocks to your left, you see they're very angular, clearly not natural. Now those continue all the way up to the top of this structure like that. Some have been more weathered, as you can see, the next row there, the rain's got onto them, they've weathered, but these have retained that clear right angle on the blocks. Now, the Ecuadorian government sent out a team to this site, and they decided that there was nothing there. I thought it was very strange, because nature doesn't cut right-angled blocks like that, put them in place, like that, and there's even a cement. It's hard to see there, but there's a cement between the blocks underneath. If you see in that left-hand corner, you'll see that that material is actually kind of a mortar, and it's also between some of the other blocks. And you can break it off, and roll in your fingers, and it turns into like a blue-coloured putty. Right? As far as I know, nobody's meant to have putty. These jungles, so very strange. They said, well, there's nothing there, we didn't find anything, so forget about it, just drop the matter. I didn't drop the matter, because I know that there's something there, there's an enormous structure. And so this led to me being involved with the Science Channel, because they contacted me, they saw some of my coverage of this megalith, and they said, well, would you like to do something with us, maybe film the site, do a project there? I said, well, sure. In the end, it didn't quite pan out, because they decided it was too hard to get to. So they took me off instead to Georgia, to the Georgian Republic. And out there, we ended up going up to the Caucasus Mountains, looking for giants, or giant bones, which was quite an experience as well. Again, megaliths up in the middle of nowhere, in the forest, up on the top of a mountain. And if anyone saw it, it's the unexplained files. Anyway, so I ended up hiking up into the middle of nowhere, finding these strange, structures, and then we're due to some permits that weren't in place. There wasn't a dig for the bones, but what we did see instead was a second site. Unfortunately, I haven't got the images of this, but there was a second site near to the main complex we went to, which was a collapsed temple. And there was a material, the likes of which I've never seen. And there was a concrete that seemed to be made of bone. It looked like human bone, mixed with stones. But it looked like the bones had somehow fused the stones together. So instead of there being a mortar or a concrete, the bones themselves were the mortar. I've never seen anything like this at all. Bizarre. Nobody knew what it was. It clearly wasn't connected to the temple complex we were at. Something far weirder. And my feeling is it's something to either of ancient lost culture that had technologies we can't yet understand, or it's aliens or something, very strange. I'll be honest, L.A. Marzulli, if anyone knows his work, he talks about the Nephilim and all of that. He says that that area is Nephilim central, and that he suspects that we're in some kind of the remnants of some Nephilim complex. I don't know. What I saw was so strange that I'd be inclined to say that perhaps he's right. I don't know. If there was such a thing as Nephilim giants or whatnot, that bone concrete structures made of human bones. Pretty frightening. So then after that, we'll turn to Ecuador. If you go on to the next slide. Carried on with the research into the complex, and I uncovered a link with these people, the Lagoa Santa. That skull is one of theirs. They're a strange group of people that live down in Brazil, and the reason why they're strange is they are Australoid, i.e. related to Australian Aboriginals. Now, why are Aboriginals down in Brazil? Going back, this is 10,000 years old, is the end of the Lagoa Santa people, as far as we understand. Around the time of the rise of the sea levels, they seem to have collapsed and disappeared. But there's evidence that they were in the Americas 40 to 50,000 years ago, right? Long before there's supposed to be anyone in the country, right? Or in the continent, I should say. So this led me on to a deep dig into what is the true origins of humans, where have we come from? What is about this out of Africa, how can it be that Aboriginals have ended up in South America, 50,000 years ago, if supposedly modern humans have only sort of started to come out of Africa into Eurasia around that time? It doesn't really add up. So I did a deep dig into this, and that led to, if you go to the next slide, that led to two books. This one, Ancient Aliens Australia, which is also with Stephen and Evan Strong, two researchers based down in Australia. And next slide, second book as well. The Into Africa Theory of Human Evolution. Now they're obviously very different. The first of those is a collaboration that shows not only was that Australia was the place where humans began, but we also tackled in that, to some degree, a story of alien involvement. This second book really is more conventional. It doesn't talk about aliens. It just goes fully into this lost story of human origins, that we don't come out of Africa, that we come out of Australia. And for a lot of people they think, well, how does that work out? I'm not saying that it's not necessary that if you go right back to the early hominins, it may well have been Africa. But when you get to Homo sapiens, absolutely, I say no. No. The evidence that I found going through the academic papers, and this is not me going out and saying I dig for myself. So I'm not a pseudo-scientist or archaeologist who pretends to be an archaeologist. I went through the academic papers, and what I found was that there was a trail of anomalies. Now, these anomalies, unfortunately, are being generally ignored, swept under the carpet, or just not picked up. If you put them together, you start finding that it actually supports that there was a presence of early humans in Indonesia and in those island areas, you'll see above Australia. We now know that, and who follows the news will see that just recently they've been discovering more hominins in the Philippines. They've realised that in Indonesia there were hominins there from at least 1 million years ago. That some of the islands that they found, obviously these very small humans, the Flores, they found these Homo floresiensis, which are kind of about, I think, a 4 foot tall early human. Now the point with that is that humans were right there in reach of Australia 1 million years ago. Now if you've made your way out from mainland Asia, and you've entered these islands, you've crossed the Wallace's Line, which is considered to be the absolute barrier of large mammals between Australia and Asia. Once you've crossed that, there's considered to be no reason why you can't reach Australia. So if you've got there, say 900,000 years ago, you're going to be in Australia, within a few thousand years, right? So at this point, we have a human presence there. Now that was a key thing for me to establish. And although I don't put aliens in this book, it is associated with what we're going to come to, because in a way you need a population of hominids in this region to make sense of what comes afterwards. So if we go to the next slide. Whilst we were doing the book Ancient Aliens in Australia, Stephen Evan, they connected us with this lady, Valerie Barrow, who is a fairly well-known psychic medium and regression therapist over in New South Wales, Australia. Now, I didn't know that she had a book that came out in about 2002, which is called Alcheringa, When the First Ancestors Were Created. Now, as we were finishing our book, they sort of let me know about it. Obviously, they kept it till then, but they didn't want to contaminate the perspective that Daniella and ourselves had with our contact experiences and what we would call contact with Pleiades, because that's how they explained themselves. We didn't know that they already had contact with Valerie, who had some similar stories to tell about a group that also, so they'd come from the Pleiades, and had written a book which detailed their interactions with early humans. Now, a bit of her backstory is important. What happened to her was in about 1994, she was living in a house called Alcheringa, which is the Aboriginal word for, is the dream time, the beginning of things, the time before time. And she had a very strange visitor turn up. This lady said to her, look, due to a chain of synchronicities, I feel that I'm meant to be here, and that you are supposed to look after this artifact that I have, whilst I go into medical treatment, because she was very unwell, that I'm trying to get it back to the Aboriginal traditional custodians. Will you please look after it until I'm able to return and collect it? Valerie was kind-hearted about it, and being involved in slightly unusual things herself. She didn't take it as being too odd. So she said, yeah, okay, fine, I'll look after it. Received an object that was wrapped up in paper bark and inside a little bag, and she understood not to open this. I mean, it's actually called a Alcheringa stone. Alcheringa stones are sacred to the Aboriginal people. They have different names in different places, and not all Aboriginal groups have them, but those that do, they're considered to be extremely sacred. They're only ever held by elders, particularly highly initiated elders, and clever men, and people that we would call shamans, clever men. They occasionally would bring them out of ceremonies, and that would be about it. The rest of the time they're hidden away in caves and places. Now this one had turned up because about a century before, as I understand it, an Afghan trader and his camel had ended up at a cave site out in the desert, and they'd stumbled on this artifact, which seemed to be a down towards Earth. Funnily enough, it fills in a bit of a backstory for Jerry, because Jerry then says to them that he remembers having had dreams throughout his life of being on a huge white spaceship, and that these alerts going. And he now understands that he piloted the craft that crashed into the water, and he actually died in the water. So he filled in events for him that had already been going on. So you find this with some of the other people involved in this story, they start to realise that they've had their own dreams and experiences in their lives that suggest that they had a past life connection. Now Valerie is a past life regression therapist, and so amongst some of her clients, after this event, she starts to find other people are coming up with little tidbits, little bits that seem to connect to this story. And funny enough, the being Alcheringa, who seems to inhabit this stone, says to her, look, you're going to meet quite a lot of people, and they're going to validate the things I'm telling you. And that actually happens. I think in all she met about 30 or so people that remembered different fragments of the story. So as far as I know, that's the largest ever group reincarnation that I'm aware of. So in that as well, it's quite extraordinary. Some of these people are totally random. Some are clients that come to her house. She has one that somebody in a car park just comes up to her and says, I really need to talk to you. Comes and sits in the car next to her and goes into a trance and starts telling her, I'm on a ship. So absolutely bizarre stuff starts happening around her. Alcheringa, meanwhile, he keeps filling in the story. He says that after the main craft blows up and these few survivors are trapped on Earth, they are dying. They can't really survive yet. Their plan was to genetically modify themselves in the mothership so that they could live on this planet. They're not well suited. They're not finished in that process. And so unfortunately, the sun is too powerful for them. The microbes in the water are killing them. There's hostile creatures. There's all sorts of things that they're not able to deal with the little bit of technology they have with them in these small crafts. Instead, they decide that what they can do is begin modification of the highest life on the planet, which is an early hominin, and that they can utilize what they do have with their technology to create a kind of hybrid, which they feel will do two things for them. One, will take this planet onto a path which they felt was preferred, which is to bring it more into the alliance, this more benevolent, slightly more, let's say, I guess more positive inclined grouping of extraterrestrials, as opposed to those that were in control of the planet, which are quite service to self, negative beings. So they feel there's on the one side to do that. The second thing is a little bit self-interested. It's because they realise that if they can modify it enough, they can direct their future incarnations into these beings. Now this is something that may sound quite extraordinary, but if you look at the Tibetan culture, you'll find that high lamas will openly say that they use specific techniques, meditation techniques, where at the end of their lives, they choose where they're going to go next. And they would choose the circumstances of their next birth. This is a directed incarnations. So this is something that, if you spend an incredible amount of time working on meditations and tantra, that is considered possible. Now, the way that it's validated in the Tibetan system is that the Tolku, the person who is reborn, is identified by the instructions that are being left by the Dalai Lama. They will go to this village, they will go there, they will look for the circumstances that are described. Often be the person will say, well, there'll be a rainbow on the day I'm born, or there'll be birds, singing, whatever it is. And then they will take artifacts, objects that that person used to own, and they will show those on the table, along with a mixture of similar objects and artifacts, and let the child pick them out. And obviously, it's in really extraordinary cases where these children pick out things. Oh yeah, that's mine. That's my glasses. That's my hat. That's mine. And then these kids, maybe 5, 4 years old, and they will know the entire, long Buddhist scriptures, all sorts of strange things. So we know that this already happens anyway. But these extraterrestrials, let's just say they're beyond that, and they're quite capable of doing this. So what happens next is they begin work. They begin to modify these early hominins. But there's something else that happens. And if we go on to the next image, actually this is just an example. Actually, some of them are similar-ish colour to this, but not necessarily as human. And if we go on to the next slide. The ship is somewhat like that. The ship is described as being a crystalline saucer with parts coming out of it. If you go on to the next slide, there's a line drawing which gives you a better image. That's basically what these people remember from the past lives. So it's a source of light craft with these coming out of it. And it can actually change its shape, it can do other things. It's considered to be, well, the way it's described is actually of a living crystal. They grew the ship, they didn't build the ship. The ship is grown from a crystalline matrix and then is imbued with an artificial intelligence. And the artificial intelligence inhabits the entire mainframe of the ship. That's why they use a silica matrix. Because it's now understood, if you go into the science basically where AI is going, where our species is going to go, towards post-biological entities, you'll find the description is usually they're considered that they will be silica-based life forms, and that the future of AI will be large silica networks. Now this is incredible, this is beyond next generation. So what at first sounds like new agey, crystal ships and whatnot, you realise, no, this is where technology is going. Instead of having a computer on board the ship, the entire ship is the computer. So mind-boggling. If you have a kilometre-sized silica craft inhabited by a computer being, basically with unbelievable calculation abilities. So go on to the next slide. Actually, that's one of the things that shocked me when I was researching this, because I would have thought, crystal, why would you build your ship out of crystal? Seems strange. We always think of metal sources. Once you understand the needs of a super AI, you realise that actually that's not sufficient at all. Now, as the craft blew up, it formed little spheres of liquid crystal in space. Right? Anyone who's familiar, obviously, with liquids in a vacuum, they take on spherical forms. Now, once that happened, they begin to be pulled down into our atmosphere. And this is a button, they've got a tektite button, australite button. The middle bit, you see the top of the sphere. Right? So this is, as the sphere came down, and the decay orbit of the debris of the ship, it begins to form these button shapes. You see the front is melted in, and it takes on an aerodynamic shape. Now these rain down across southern Australia, and indeed up to the central desert. They're unique in the history of the planet. Absolutely unique. You don't find tektite that shape anywhere else. There's about four strewn fields that with tektites around the world. There's one in America, we've got one in Africa, we've got another one obviously in Central Europe, Moldavite, and then you have these australite tektites, right? Totally unique in 4.5 billion years. Now they're part of a huge mystery, because when they first found these, and they found this shape, the geologists and the chemists, everyone took a look, and there's been lots of studies on these, and there is, I didn't realize there's a 100-year-long mystery of australites, right, which is, if you weren't looking for pieces of a crystalline ship, you probably would never stumble on. But basically, they couldn't work out, how could it be that if there was an impact of an asteroid or comet, and it hit our planet, how would it throw the material all the way back up into space to form these liquid spheres, which would then freeze in the vacuum of space and come back down again? So it doesn't make sense, because as the material is thrown up, passes through the atmosphere, it starts to cool. So if it did somehow make it all the way back into space, it would already be solid. So it couldn't form these liquid spheres. So there was been a long, long debate over how these are formed. As you go beyond the central desert and you head up in towards northern Australia, you'll find that these kind of stop, and you'll get other types of australite. I think in the next slide it might be some pictures of, that's the impact. No, let's go to one more. Sorry. But anyway, there's various shapes, there's various types of this. Most of them aren't buttons. So what you have instead is if you imagine that you've got wreckage coming down, that as the big pieces break the atmosphere, they no longer obviously are going to form these liquid spheres in space, because they've already come to the atmosphere, but they're still breaking apart, burning up and melting. And so they form different shapes, like spheres and dumbbell shapes and other shapes. So there's a pattern. We know that the craft was coming down from southern Australia, Antarctica way, breaks the surface, breaks into our atmosphere, somewhere in central Australia, carries on down, large pieces are exploding in airbursts across all the way up to Southeast Asia, and there's an area there in Laos where they have what's called muon tektite, which is the same material, but it's on the ground, it's in layers, it's very strange. We know that's the end of the path of this craft. And that with basic deeper analysis of it, they found obviously it's made out of strange, and there's strange compounds in there. It's got anomalous isotopes of magnesium. There's too much silica in it. It's like 80% silica. Asteroids goes up to about 60% silica. There's also silica from melted quartz. And from what I understand, quartz very rarely forms in any large amount in space. What you'll find is just silica. So to find it's melted quartz is because there was another of these anomalies. Also, the dating on it was important because it's been dated to 780,000 years ago. Right? So when I was out looking for this material, I know in the description for Alcheringa in the book that there is a quartz or silica craft that's exploded, that it's just huge. So I'm looking, well, what we've got in the geological records that will mesh with this. Is there anything? And in fact, of course, there is. We have this anomalous melted silica that's blew up in space. If you look at the NASA papers, they come up with some extraordinary stuff. Say that the only way that they can understand this material is it must come from a body that is orbiting the planet, like a natural moon. Okay? So hang on a minute. So you've got a kilometre quartz moon orbiting our planet. Wait a minute. Does that make any sense? I'm thinking, no, it doesn't. Secondly, they're looking at it, they say, well, look, to get these little spheres as you see, they have to be also coming down in an orbital path, as though you've got a decaying orbit, and that these little pieces are coming off and they're following the same orbit. So you can imagine the ship was in orbit, it's blown apart, these little fragments are coming off, and they're saying to get these buttons, they have to be at a very sort of horizontal plane to the Earth. So they can't be just raining from space, like asteroids do. It doesn't make sense. So they come to the conclusion that really, there's no one answer that we can think of. It can't be a comet coming in and smashing it. It can't be something being thrown back out. It has to be orbiting. It has to have exploded in space. For a long time there was theories it was part of the moon. That was debunked. They found that it couldn't be. It's not made of the same material. It couldn't be a comet. It couldn't be an asteroid. So what was it in the end? They can't tell you, right? All they know now is it's not from an impact. It's not from anything they understand, right? But if you start put into there, you think, well, hang on a minute. This matches exactly what this Alcheringa is telling us, that there's this large orbiting vessel that's come apart. Now, the second thing that we come to then, we sort of skip through a little bit there, is that the bomb, afterwards there is a second event which is described, which is that there is a follow-up mission that comes to this planet. Right? That these beings, although they are here, they're carrying on what they're doing these modifications, there is a follow-up mission. Another group of beings comes that's from the same alliance, not necessarily the same beings. They're described as being leonine, a kind of lion humanoids, strange as you like. They turn up, but they're not here just for a simple sort of rescue. That they are here to enforce the agreement with this other party. Now, this other party are a reptilian race that was under the ground. That's what I think people will struggle with. You think straight away, obviously, reptilians, David Icke, all that stuff. But that's what they're described as, a reptilian race that's under the ground. And they turn up and they say, look, you've agreed that you would hand over the planet, you haven't done it, you've opened fire on a peaceful colony ship, you can get off the planet, or we're going to bombard your underground bases. There is an exchange between them, most of them leave. They leave and they jump through a stargate which leads them back to Orion, which is where it's described as where they come from. Not all of them go. Now these leonines, they use a particular kind of weapon when they bombard planets. Alcheringa describes it as that they pull in comets, asteroids, whatever they want, they pull them in with a kind of tractor beam technology. They don't just fire lasers and all. They say, look, we are capable of cracking open planets if we want to. Obviously that's not the intention here. They pull in asteroids and they begin a bombardment of Earth, bombarding areas where they know that there are military facilities of their enemy. Now, I'm thinking to myself, when I read that, I heard Alcheringa had claimed that, I thought, well, hang on a minute, surely we'd know about that. A multi-directional asteroid bombardment of Earth, in fairly recent geological times. Surely there'd be scars for that. We would find some evidence. So, is it that it's not true, or is it just we haven't found it? So I went again scouring through the geological papers, and I couldn't find anything at first. And it turned out that in 2016, there had been a study by a German geological team, and they'd uncovered that 780,000 years ago, there had been a multi-directional asteroid bombardment of our planet. Right? And if you keep that in mind, you think the last time something like that happened was when the planet was forming. There was these amazing bombardments. Now, it's very rare for a large object to hit the Earth. Certainly, for a whole load of them to hit at once from different directions, It's bizarre. It doesn't add up. And in fact, they even found that the composition of the different asteroids is not the same. They're not even part of a singular swarm, right? But they all happen to bombard the Earth at the same time, hitting in Mexico, Australia, Africa, Tasmania. This very, very strange concordance that you got the same dating again. Bear in mind, the Australite is dated to 780,000 years ago. We now have a multi-directional bombardment 780,000 years ago. Valerie couldn't have known of this because, of course, her book is published in 2002 and the events of 1995. So there's no way she has access to this information. So if she was to want to create a story, she wouldn't have known this. Now there's, of course, a third element to this, which is the modifying of humans. This is a little play on the 2001: A Space Odyssey. That basically they choose one of the local hominins, what they describe as being a short, hairy, ape-like man. They take these and they begin to use what's left of their medical technologies on their crafts and start to create hybrid embryos which are implanted into both female hominins and some of the female extraterrestrials, which is quite bizarre. And some of these they're described as having rather like a marsupial area. They're part of their stomach area can be opened. So what we consider their womb is actually almost more like the area that a marsupial has. They can actually put these embryos in. So there's some description of some of these beings. Bizarre, of course, but then we are talking about extraterrestrials. Between these two lines, between the human experiments, the alien experiments, they create new types of hominins. Now, they're not all successful. There's descriptions there of the initial results. Some of them are quite horrific, that die soon after birth. But after a number of experiments, ongoing, they do create some that are successful. Now, the funny thing is, of course, is that for a very long time, going up to, in fact, about, I think, 3 years ago, it was agreed, throughout human origins that Homo sapiens begins around about 200,000 years ago to 300,000 years ago, splitting away from Neanderthals around about 400 to 500,000 years ago. So the idea that going back towards 780,000 years ago, maybe this was happening, would really have been considered totally out of left field, even without the aliens. They would say, well, no, this isn't right, the timing's off. But what's happened since then is about 2 years ago, due to extracting of DNA from a site in Spain, Cima de los Huesos, we found the oldest human DNA ever to be recovered. And during the sampling process, what they found is that, no, they had the dates wrong. And that, in fact, the origins of Homo sapiens is much earlier. That we've diverged away from an earlier hominin species around about 750 to 800,000 years ago. And the Neanderthals, Denisovans and whatnot have diverged again not long after that, probably 700,000 years ago. Suddenly the dates are all back into the ballpark again with this 780,000 years. Stunning as that is. And you now have 3 totally anomalous events, all in concordance. A bizarre exploding quartz moon, with a bombardment shortly afterwards, multi-directional asteroid bombardment, and then the splitting away of the first Homo sapiens, very archaic Homo sapiens, at around 780,000 years ago. Now, I don't know about you, but I struggle enough with coincidences anyway. But when you get coincidences on that scale, where anomalous events, geological time, in such concordance, where they come out with the same dates, and they involve the mysterious origins of humans, then suddenly you're thinking, well, hang on, this is really, really, destroying the paradigm. And as you look into the human sort of genome as well, if you go on to the next picture, I don't remember what got on that one. Basically, yes, you sort of look into the human genome, there's evidence in there too. Okay, so we don't have to, my view of this was that, I can't rely solely on any kind of downloads. Downloads happen. People have abductions, they have contact experiences, they have religious experiences. We all know that there's thousands of those out there. There's hundreds and hundreds of books about it. Now the difference here is that I'm interested in validating evidence. So I think, well, I've got 2 of these pretty well done. What about the third one? Is there anything else that will support the idea that humans are not a naturally evolved species, but there is something more that has gone on here? So, of course, I dug back into the papers, and having already written a book, on this subject, the Exodus, which is all about conventional, human evolution, I already knew that there's anomalies. You know, it's well known in the literature that there's anomalies. If you dig in enough, what you find is this particularly interesting one, which is the fusion of chromosome 2. Now, if anyone's followed the work, say Lloyd Pye, who unfortunately died a few years ago, he used to talk about the fusion of chromosome 2. It was one of the most glaring pieces of evidence that we had been created. And the reason for that is that we have obviously two chromosomes, what we call ancestral primate chromosomes, which have fused head to head, forming a singular chromosome. Now, with Lloyd, unfortunately, you know, he didn't live to see the evidence move on to the point where we could date this. I think he has his dates rather wrong, but like many others, I think he assumed that this would date to around 200,000 years ago, when we supposedly Homo sapiens began. But that's not the case. There's a British biologist who he decided he wanted to know when this happened as well, because it had always been left as a bit of a mystery that, you know, knew it happened after the separation from chimpanzees and other primates, but they didn't know exactly when. So he took a look at it from a chemical point of view. He wanted to see when that central area of the chromosome had slowed its mutation rate, because the ends of chromosomes mutate faster than the central part. So through his sort of complex analysis, which I won't pretend, I'm not a biologist or chemist, so I understand that, you know, obviously he went into that, he looked at how that dating, you know, worked. What he deduced was it had to have happened close to 750,000 years ago. However, he also points out that it's found in both Denisovans and Neanderthals. So it has to have also occurred before the split between modern humans and those two subspecies. Which means, again, if they've all split around 780,000, it has to have happened around then. So again, you can't be just pushed too far back. So we know that then we've got that, the chromosome 2 fusion. What's interesting about the fusion of chromosome 2 is that it actually happens as well on an active gene. When you look at the gene that's involved, it's a gene that's to do with the brain. It's also, there's areas of the chromosome that are fused which are to do with the reproduction system and our immune system. Key systems you'd want to get at if you were trying to make an upgraded creature, which is quite strange, because usually a natural fusion doesn't happen like that, it doesn't happen on an active gene. There was other elements to it as well which are very bizarre, because what we find is instead of there just being one population of early humans with 48 chromosomes and another with 46 chromosomes, which would be expected if there was a natural mutation. In fact, you'd actually expect those with the mutation to basically usually have a problem and become a tiny minority or die off, be reabsorbed back into the larger population. Now, that's not what happened at all. Instead, there's a total replacement. We know today there's apart from a few people who are born with a random error, we don't have people with 48 chromosomes. They're all gone. Nobody else on the planet survived from those other groups. Very odd. Scientists said, well, okay, to explain that, you need a couple of different conditions. Firstly, we would expect it to be in a small, isolated population, somewhere where they couldn't interbreed with other groups. Australia's good for that. Totally cut off from all of the other hominids in Eurasia and Africa. And on top of that, they said then, of course, it has to have given extraordinary benefits, that it would spread throughout the entire population and it would go on to become that widespread. So again, we have now a mutation which is happening in a small isolated group, almost like you would have for a test group of hominins, and it gives such extraordinary benefits that it's a total replacement. Everyone becomes the same as us. Now today we know there's something else here that explains it as well. Anyone that knows a little bit about CRISPR gene editing technologies, which are just on the up and coming now. Right? There's a particular type of CRISPR technology which is, well, there's been consideration of banning it because it has implicit dangers. It's called a gene drive. Now, a gene drive allows you to program the genes of an organism such as that when it interbreeds, instead of having copies of both the mother and father, the gene drive will copy over the other set of genes. So it doesn't matter. At that point, if you use a gene drive, it doesn't matter. If your new species mixes with, say, some Homo erectus, it doesn't matter, because the children will always be the edited ones. It will simply overlay over their genome. This is extraordinary when you find that an entire species is replaced in exactly the way now that we are saying we can do this. That they're talking about eradicating mosquitoes in Africa by simply using gene drive technologies. So we can commit genocides on species now, which you can imagine there's some concerns about that. But it looks like somebody's done it before, because there's not a 48 chromosome man standing. There's other things in our genome which are very strange. That is not the only one by any stretch. In fact, I wanted to see, what really makes us different from, the other living primates. There's a lot. At first you look at them, you'd think, well, physically, we look quite unlike a chimpanzee or whatever, it looks very, very different. But actually, that's one of the strange things that's happened, is that if you look actually at an infant chimpanzee, and you compare it to an infant human, it's not that different. Because what happens is, later in life, they start to have the jaw moves forward, the eye ridges form, all sorts of other things happen, and they look more like, what the classic image of a chimpanzee. If you slow down that process, and you keep it as a young ape in form, what you have is something very much like us. And this is called neoteny. It's the process of retaining childhood traits into adulthood. And if you compare, if you look at humans today and you look at infant apes, you'll see that we're essentially an ape stuck in its childhood. We don't become morphologically adult. So that's one thing that stands out, I think, that they did. But other than that, there's specific genes that they got to. There's a gene for the neocortex, which is the folds in your brain, which is considered to be one of the really most important genes that they suspect for what makes us human. Now, when they looked into this, they wanted to get, understand when it evolved, how it evolved. What they found was that, in fact, it's not a complete gene. So it looks almost as though, this is how they describe it, it looks almost as though someone's snipped out the gene, cut a piece that they want, copied it, and put it back in. Hang on a minute, you're reading that in a science paper, and they're talking about one guy's saying it looks like it's been Xeroxed and put back in. Bizarre. Another one of these genes, a very important brain gene, is described as having appeared fully formed out of the non-coding DNA. No idea how, just appears out of our junk DNA. And it gives us incredible benefits to the brain. And you go through and you start finding there's actually a lot of genes for humans that are very anomalous. And they tend to cluster around a time about 800,000 years ago. We already knew that that was an important time, because in the fossil record, you find that there is a sudden change. And I think I may have the image there if you go forward. There should be a graph, I think. Go to the next slide. You might notice there's a slightly anomalous change on that graph. This is mapping out the expansion of the human skull. Right? And there's 2 points where you have really anomalous changes. One is around 1.8 million years ago, which is the rise of Homo erectus, which is a fairly like to us, but still a fairly archaic hominin. It was not as like-brained as us, obviously. We do see a change there. We get to about 1.8 million years, and we see that curve begins. Now, the thing with that is that, although there are some interesting changes in the brain, I do think that they are also earlier engineering by the other extraterrestrial race that is on this planet. It's described that they create hominins essentially as a kind of a slave race. They're not particularly nice beings. But what they do is they create a being that's not all that intelligent. They modify it a little bit around then, and you see this increase in brain size between habilis to erectus. But this is also in line with body size changes. You've got to remember that we're starting out as a kind of a chimp-like creature, right? And so the brain size is increasing there with body size. So they're now bringing us up to being, more like a sort of a 6-foot-tall being with the larger brain that goes with that size. So although that looks kind of anomalous, it's not what's really strange. What's really strange is that from Homo erectus, at 800,000 years ago, the brain size just keeps spiraling upwards. And at this point, the body size is not increasing. This is solely brain change. And it just accelerates all the way up to us. It slows down about 200,000 years ago. So what the hell is happening there? Because there's dangers that go with that, and there's a lot of negatives. So if you think... Right, I will just sort of finish up a bit on these changes that were done. And then afterwards, you'll be very welcome to ask me questions on any of these topics. Now, there's a few other little points I wanted to get to. Now, I hopefully have done most of the main parts, but as we got to here, obviously there was a lot of, as I say, a lot of different specific genes that are on. Now, I want to go back to this increasing size of the skull, though, because there's something intriguing about that. Because when you think about it, if very suddenly the human skull starts to increase in size, there is kind of an obvious problem with this, because you've still got to pass through the birth canal. You've got to successfully be born. It's no good saying, well, okay, we'll just create this big-brained hominin, and we'll just leave it like that. Because what will happen is the mothers will die in childbirth, taking the babies with them, and that's the end of the experiment. You know, they will be dead. Because you can't just expect, you know, double the size to pass through the birth canal. It just doesn't work like that. So we have this really strange thing that comes in. This will go back to the neoteny that I mentioned earlier. But what it seems to have happened is that there was a change done to slow down our development and also to allow us to be born while we're still essentially a fetus. Now, if you really look at human babies, you can sort of see it's quite obvious. The skull, obviously, you know, is still growing quite rapidly when they're born. It's not fused. We are, you know, born totally hairless. We are born with characteristics that you see in other species, basically, when they're born, you know, before they're born, you see in the womb, we still retain. And then we actually grow at a similar rate outside the womb, initially, to as if we were still in it. So what this seems to have done is basically allowed us to be born with the largest brain that you can get whilst still in, you know, in vitro, but then to be born and continue that development with, you know, a huge dependence of the baby on the mother. You know, if you look at, say, horses, you know, in a few hours, a horse foal can be up and running. You know, look at us. It takes years. On top of that, you know, even when we come out at that stage, we still have years and years of, you know, dependency as children. So these are all quite sort of unique to us. Because if you look at, say, a chimpanzee, right, a chimp baby can pretty much be born within a very short period. It can grab onto the mother and be carried away. Now, that's some strength right there, right? So off it goes. Us, no, nothing like that. Can't even support our own heads on our necks, you know, right? Certainly can't walk for years. Right, so there's some really odd things happening. I think there's what they did is they got in there, they modified some of these genes to have increased neoteny. Now, some of the neotenic features that we have, for example, are that we no longer have this protruding jaw. And I think this happened very suddenly, again, as a change, because we know it's because the human jaw still produces too many teeth, right? So it's trying to produce a jaw that's coming out like this, and we end up with all these problems with wisdom teeth and other teeth. And I suppose most people have some crooked teeth, right? So you end up having to have somebody took out at some point. Again, this is showing that this happened very fast. Evolution has not caught up. You'll now find that a lot of people being born without wisdom teeth. This is evolution now in process, which is clearing up that anomaly, right? We also have, compared to other primates, we have other features. We have this, you know, sort of large head, larger eyes. We have, which is quite nice, but no hair. All of these things are what we call neotenic features. Now, so I think what they did, they got around that problem that, you know, we don't want all these babies and all these people to die off. So they've gone in, they've done a bit of clever engineering there to ensure that we can be successfully born. If you compare, this, again, these anomalies show, if you contrast us against other primates, you'll find that the average, you know, length of birth time is several hours shorter than all the other primates, right? We have some very unique difficulties. You know, it's not completely dealt with by these changes. On top of that, we have the most dangerous childbirth of any living primates. You know, most species, it's very rare to lose, you know, children during childbirth, and in fact, the childbirth is usually fairly painless. You know, so we seem to have got a bit of a curse as well as benefits out of some of these changes. There's also some really strange anomalies in our reproductive system. So we have a whole slew of problems. You know, that it's always a wonder that we didn't go extinct, because it's so hard for humans to actually, you know, conceive in the first place. And they found there's all kinds of anomalies in our reproductive system which are unique to humans, which is very strange. Again, when you start finding that, why would evolution favour problems? Now, this has been flagged up recently in a book called Human Errors by a leading sort of US scientist. And he sort of said, you know, it's quite odd because you find these things are running counter to evolution, because obviously you expect a species to be favoured that has no problems with childbirth, has no problems with reproduction, etc. Out of the primate family, we seem to have suddenly gone down a route of developing problems which would drive us towards extinction. Now, they're unable to explain this, because clearly if you're going to say evolution is just random mutations with selection, then that would clear up all of those people that had those problems, and we would end up back to a population that didn't have them. So something fairly recently and fairly anomalous has led to these really counterintuitive changes in human beings. There's another thing about increasing brain size, which is a problem, because it takes a lot of energy to feed the human brain, an incredible amount of energy, lots of calories, it's really calorie hungry. Now, that comes at a price. A lot of the price has been paid in our musculature structure. Now, if you were, say for example, if you were to pit a a chimpanzee against, you know, a heavyweight boxer, for example, you'll find it will tear his arms off, tear him to pieces. Yeah? So why is it that we've been favoured in a time, you know, going back a few 100,000 years ago, when it was a time of, you know, tooth and claw, we suddenly start giving up our, you know, our primate muscular structure for this calorie-hungry brain at a time when we don't really have any advanced tools, we don't immediately have the benefits that we have today. It's not at all clear that this is a good thing. The fact that we are suddenly becoming weaker and weaker, you know, in a time when there's, you know, huge predators, you know, and even the other primates can now, you know, tear us apart. It's very strange that we would have that kind of trade-off with just natural mutations with selection. Why isn't selection favouring the strongest? Why is it favouring this bigger calorie-hungry brain? Because it takes a few 100,000 years. If you say that this is happening 780,000 years ago, we're not developing advanced weapons or anything at that time. You know, it takes a good few 100,000 years for it to pay off that we actually grow this bigger brain. So it's quite counterintuitive in terms of natural selection. We also find, of course, that, you know, it's really not until about 200,000 years ago that this process is really complete, which is with us, we call Homo sapiens sapiens emerging at that time, with other genetic changes which happen around then. And I have a suspicion that there is something else that's been done at 200,000 years, that there's been another modification. Because though I'm very focused on 780,000 years ago, make no mistake, there are other anomalous points in the timeline. The first, of course, is at the very beginning. So when you get back, how did life start on this planet? You know, how did DNA get here? Now, in recent years, it's become more of a hot topic because there's been a few finds. There's been a fossil find in Canada that suggested that the earliest, you know, organisms were here around about 4.2 billion years ago. Now, bear in mind the planet's supposed to be 4.6 billion. DNA is supposed to be around, you know, come about through random geological and chemical processes. It was always thought it would take, you know, a vast period of time for this happened by random chance. And now they find, hey, we've got fossils suggesting that this happened very quickly. And then more recently, I think in fact just a few months ago, there was a DNA study done where they wanted to find out what was and when was the first common ancestor of all organisms on this planet. And what they came to was the understanding that it was 4.5 billion years ago that life appeared. That's 100,000 years after the planet begins to form. Right? At that point, there is barely a surface. There is still an asteroid bombardment underway. The environment, in terms of being, you know, beneficial to life, is really not there. This is a very hostile environment. It looks almost as if a seed has been planted, and as soon as the surface forms, it you know, comes forth. That's not the way we would expect it with, you know, a hot pool of water producing life. It doesn't make sense. There's not enough time. And one of the co-discoverers of the DNA molecule, Francis Crick, he looked at this problem, and obviously when he was still alive, they hadn't even got to that date. But he already felt that it was way too early that life emerged. And that looking at the complexity of DNA, he couldn't see how this could have come about by chance. Because quite simply, you have two inordinately complex processes in DNA for the coding to happen that have to emerge at the same time. And both of them, by chance alone, I think they calculated the odds to be 1 to the power of a number that was so big, it's larger than all of the atoms in the universe added together. And that was the chances against this actually happening by simple chemical processes and random chance. So you've got leading academics that tell us, look, there's something not right here. We think life has arrived on this planet from space. And looking at that, could it be random? You know, could it just be on a comet? This is one of the arguments. You know, there's a number of scientists now saying they think life came in comets or asteroids and hit this planet. I don't believe so. The reason why is because there's intense radiation in space, which understood is most likely would destroy any life that was on such a rock. It's much more likely that for it to arrive here, it has to come in a structured craft of some sort, or seeds that are in some way shrouded in, you know, protective surfaces. Bizarrely enough, and unfortunately I've got an image of this, but bizarrely enough, a few years back, there was some experiments done by a university team in the UK, and they were monitoring the upper stratosphere, and one of their detectors was hit by a small metal sphere made of vanadium, which is a very strong, not naturally found sort of compound, you know, is used, you know, for hardening alloys. And from this sphere was leaking some kind of goo, which looked like an organic material. Now, this guy obviously, looked at it and he's thinking, well, hang on a minute, this is exactly the kind of delivery system we'd expect. And so he's working now with a guy that, Vikram Singh, I think it is, a professor who's actually, I think, based down in Cardiff, or was.
Vikram Singh.
Yeah, Vikram Singh, who was based in Cardiff, I don't know if he still is. But
no, he's in Buckingham now.
Yeah, so this guy, he's the leading sort of proponent of the panspermia model, so they've been working together on this. But it seems that we've kind of potentially found the kind of seeds that were used to seed this planet. And that changes the story again, because you think, well, hang on a minute. You know, if we've been seeded by an extraterrestrial civilization in the first place, it calls into question some fundamental assumptions by SETI and some of the other scientists who say, well, look, how could extraterrestrials stumble on our little backwater planet? You know, UFOs and whatnot, they can't be aliens because aliens wouldn't have found us. You know, why would they have come out to, you know, this little backwater just at the time when life is here and happened to stumble on us? And you can see why logic is against that. But if you take away that and say, well, hang on a minute, if this planet is seeded, then it's always been known that life was here. That there's always been forces out there in the cosmos who knew life was here because they planted it here. And if other extraterrestrials know of their activities, you start to open up the Pandora's box of how many species knew that this was a planet with an ecosystem. Right? This starts to then blend with what we are seeing today, of course, that people are reporting all kinds of beings, and all kinds of encounters, and in many of them they are told, we are in some way involved in your evolution. You know, that we are involved in the planet's ecosystem. We have a concern about the ecosystem. Often the messages are, you know, you're destroying the planet, or you know, there's going to be an environmental catastrophe. They seem to have some kind of concern about this, as though it's some project that they've been involved with. Again, that seems to make a lot of sense with what we're finding. Also in the genome, there's evidence of what's called horizontal gene transfer. And horizontal gene transfer is quite interesting because it's the detection of genes that have entered the human lineage, but not from ancestors, but have come somehow from other organisms. Now, some of these are types of funguses, some of them are other animals, and some of them have come from viruses, particularly viruses and bacteria. But viruses are just because if you use a modified retrovirus, you can use that to carry genes into a species deliberately. So we don't then know whether or not, was this an incidental event that a virus infected us and it carried across genes from another species, or is somebody using that as a tool in the same way that we've discussed the CRISPR technologies, that we now have methods of doing these things deliberately. It need not be accidental. And some of these genes that have come across are pretty intriguing, to do with the brain's development. There's others that to do with the differentiation of blood types, some really unexpected functions to have come from other species. We also find that there's evidence that there is a vast cloud of retroviruses that is circling our planet. And there are concerns by some of these geneticists saying that we think that when these rain down, they cause sudden evolutionary events. That when these viruses enter the system, they cause mutations in us that are not slow changes over vast periods of time, but are very sudden. And if you look at 200,000 years ago, when we start to, again, we become Homo sapiens sapiens, there's evidence to suggest that something very strange happened then, because a recent study found that something like 70% of all the tested organisms that were involved in the study, which is a vast number, they found 70% of them, their mitochondrial DNA, the female line of the DNA, the part there they're looking at, only traces back to 200,000 years ago. And 70% of the species they looked at, as though there was suddenly a global event that mutated the life forms all around the planet. And matches very well with one of these distributions of these retroviruses. Are they being simply put into the air above us, they rain down and they modify the experiment. You see that, okay, it's time for another upgrade. Just release one of these modified spores, put it into the atmosphere, it will rain down on them. And it's kind of concerning because, at any moment these things can come, if these are being deliberately engineered, I suspect they are, then they can come raining down and change us. And that's not the only point 200,000 years ago. There was a paper, I think now about a year ago, some of you may have read in the press that there was an article that came out suggesting that octopus might be in some way an alien species. But in the same paper, they discussed the Cambrian explosion, which at that point in time, several hundred million years ago, there was a sudden change from being a few simple single-cell organisms to suddenly this outbursting of life and more complex life forms appearing very suddenly in the geological record. Now, I remember a team of about 30 academics that came together because they know these kind of papers, you know, these can be like a poison chalice to drink from. When they start talking about, you know, alien upgrades in any way, even if you don't mention, you know, intelligence, and simply say we think life comes from space, we think that there's organisms floating in space. Those are enough. So they teamed together, 30 of them, putting their names to it, saying we think that there was one of these panspermia events at that point with viral spores raining down, modifying life on this planet. But they go a little bit further, and they said if you look at some of the creatures here, for example the octopus, there's some very strange things about them. So the octopus has what they consider to be beyond like next generation evolutionary changes. They're saying it's almost as though evolution has borrowed from a future event and brought it back to the octopus. The octopus has these, you know, adaptive abilities that are not seen anywhere else. Changing its colour rapidly, changing its shape. It has a completely different eye system, visual system to other animals. It has intelligence. As anyone is aware, they're extremely intelligent animals. They have a different type of intelligence that has appeared in a completely separate way to ours. Now, all these systems seem to come, in their view, from some other evolutionary event, which they suspect occurred on another planet, right? And that is that these octopus have possibly arrived here frozen in comets, was their idea. Now, I take that as being the academics' way out of not wanting to say possibly carried in a structured craft, because I don't see how a comet can carry them here. You know, if you're going to get to that, you have to be honest and say it's more likely that they can survive frozen in some kind of vessel than they can arrive on a meteorite or a comet. Doesn't really make sense. Or there's somebody already on this planet that's playing with life, which is modifying these creatures, which is doing these things here. And they point out it's not just the octopus. There's an awful lot of animals in the record that don't seem to have precursors. They just appear in the fossil record out of nowhere. Bizarre. In fact, birds, I believe, and I've actually this from Brian's book, the birds seem to appear twice, for instance, or bird-like creatures, you know, that they appear and then they go extinct, and later on they seem to almost fly back in from somewhere, you know, and appear again in the fossil record without any sort of, you know, evolutionary event leading to them again. Something's not right in that. There's something very strange going on there. And if we look at today, of course, and with, as I say, the information coming out, contactees, and, you know, some very strange tales, it does seem that the things are coming together, that this was an experiment of some sort from the beginning, you know, some kind of project here, the delivery of DNA to this planet. And I consider DNA to be a very advanced extraterrestrial terraforming technology. That's what it is. You spray it down on a planet, and it goes from being barren to being an incredible ecosystem like we have here. And then you see, what is it that when extraterrestrials come here, what do they want? Because there's been stories of maybe they come for gold, you know, maybe they come for water. And those things, think about it. There's plenty of gold out in the solar system. You can mine the asteroid belt, find all the gold you want. There's water on comets, all of that's plentiful. What do we have that's really interesting to some of these races? What is it that people report having taken? You know, DNA, again and again. You look at the reports, they'll say they have encounters, and the extraterrestrials took samples. You know, and also people, you know, animals being taken. All sorts of strange things are happening. The most valuable thing on this planet is not gold. You know, it is the DNA itself. You know, and the fact that we've had this period to evolve all these different life forms who implicitly have some very interesting characteristics. And that there may be that there are interests out there who see something like the octopus and say, hey, you know what, I'd like to have the ability to shift my shape and my colour. Let's just extract some DNA from the octopus and see if we can meddle with that and use that as an upgrade. So you start to say, hang on a minute, this is not so bizarre at all. And you mesh this with the reports that are coming from thousands and thousands of people. You know, I've had my own experiences, obviously my wife's experience, I'm sure lots of people have their experiences here. But if you read widely, you'll know that there's certainly that is a theme in the contact experiences. It's two things, the ecosystem and DNA. And I think that we are heading to some kind of end point of the experiment. And I think that, you know, that's what we're seeing, that, you know, we have the complex life, we have this hominin that's been further upgraded, we have the capabilities for contact, for, you know, all of these things that are happening, psychic phenomena, it seems to be, in some way we've been upgraded to be able to have intuitive abilities. In fact, there's a gene which seems to allow for that, which is FOXP2. There's evidence that FOXP2 enables not only, but it enables not only a higher speech ability that we have to form words, but also it's been implicated in an area of the brain, the caudate, which the guy, when I looks this up, a guy called Gary Nolan, who's has been associated with the To the Stars Academy. But anyway, and he also, you probably remember Gary Nolan, he was the guy that looked at the Atacama mummy. So anyone who's seen that, they'll know that he's the geneticist involved with that. He's been looking at this structure in the ganglion in the brain, which seems to be related to intuition and higher cognitive functions. FOXP2 gene is also implicated in changes in that region. My suspicion then is that when these beings changed FOXP2, they weren't just after upgrading us for language, but also for intuitive capabilities, and increasing our psychic abilities. So again, there's some purpose to that. It seems to be that there are interests out there that are giving us certain skills which will be highly beneficial, whilst there may be others who have done things to us which are quite negative. And as I said, there are things in the human genome which are not upgrades. You know, they look to me like downgrades, damage. So there seems to be, I think, some kind of two-way pull. You know, and again, look at the experiences. What are people telling you? There's people who have some very negative experiences, people on the other side very positive experiences. It's not, I don't believe that this is a singular intelligence. You know, there's multiple players at the table. Some of them are friendly, some of them are neutral, and some of them are downright nasty. And that bears out again and again in the contact experiences. Where's it all going? I guess we're going to see, because I think we are not far off now from it. Anyone who follows the subject knows that there's a lot of rumblings about disclosure at the moment, whether that will pan out. There's craft material, which is being analysed at the moment by the To the Stars Academy. There's obviously more genetic work being done, as I say, by Gary Nolan and Dr. Kit Green, who's been in these secret programs for a very long time, connected with all Project Stargate and Urigella and all those days. So these people are all appearing again out of the woodwork, and you know, there's I think some interesting things are going to be developing in the next couple of years. Obviously, I'm doing something similar, but I'm not connected with the CIA. I'm not connected with any of the deep state. So I would like to think that, you know, for those people who don't trust those initiatives, which I understand if they don't, that I'm offering them an alternative. That there is craft debris that has already been analysed, which has already been identified. We don't need to wait on some spook to tell us about it. It's rained down in mass across Australia. They can't cover it up, they can't hide it, it's too much of it. That we have the genetic anomalies already. I don't need to wait for, you know, another book to come out from these people or their organisations. It's already there. We've identified the genetic changes. There's specific, you know, chromosomes. There's specific genes that I can refer anyone to. You know, they can see for themselves. You don't need to, you know, wait for the next disclosure event. It really comes down to what resonates with you and what you're able to go and check for yourselves. So I hope that, you know, I've given you some of that, and that, you know, if anyone has questions, you know, I'd be glad to take them. I'll probably leave it there. Okay. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah, I find that quite interesting. Actually, my suspicion is that Homo naledi represents something close to what we would be today without the modification. Right? Because Homo naledi is quite interesting because he seems to be an isolated hominin population that survived all the way to around 200,000 years ago. And of course, when they first found the bones, the scientists were sure this must be a hominin about 1 million, 2 million years old. They were looking at the size, they're looking at the brain size, it's still got the grasping fingers for climbing, you know, and it's like, how can that be living alongside Homo sapiens, right? And that's what I'm saying, because in my model, of course, the engineering is happening in Australia, not in Africa. So there's no problem in my model at all for having an isolated, you know, population, a remnant in Africa, which has remained how we would be today without modification. Yeah.
Yes, it seems to me that one of the negative forces on this planet at one time is religion. Notice the notion of religion, different religions. Now, does that come from genes, extraterrestrials, or has man developed this thing for himself?
Yeah, I mean, my...
Your view on that.
Sure. I mean, I know that, interestingly, I know Bob Lazar talked about that, didn't he, in his, if you're aware, that in his supposed, encounters with secret documents at S4, that he encountered some documents which talked about human religions. And in there it suggested that most of our religions were essentially there to, not only to control us, it said to preserve the containers. And they simply refer to us as containers, right? And that the containers need some kind of instructions that stop them from destroying themselves, destroying all of the containers. And that religion had been intended for this purpose, to guide us in a way that we wouldn't, I guess, go to, ironically, we wouldn't do these horrible things to each other. But clearly that hasn't worked very well, because religion seems to equally cause wars and other problems. But said, I think this is a control system that's been given. I don't think it's emerged just naturally. I don't think it's just a cargo cult mentality, where we've looked at the sources and made them into gods, which is one argument. I think this is some of this is direct, where there's been intelligences coming here that have an interest in directing our behaviour in certain ways, and giving us a sense of looking up to them, so that when they come visit, they're seen as above us, and gods of the sky. So I mean, I do think it's more direct than simply us creating this on our own.
Explain CRISPR too. Explain CRISPR, because I'm fairly sure they're not entirely aware of what you're talking about when you're talking about CRISPR.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I know I touched, but I didn't explain it very well. I mean, I'm not an expert. Basically, CRISPR is a new way of cutting out parts of the genome that we don't want, modifying, going in and editing the human genome. So that if we say there's a hereditary trait, which is negative, obviously there's quite a lot of these, that you can go in and actually modify the genetic code so that the offspring will no longer carry that genetic trait, and we can eradicate certain nasty conditions. But of course, on the flip side, we can also create problems. And in fact, as I said, we use these gene drives, where you force these changes onto everyone. You can eradicate species. You can actually target, say, populations. So it's quite frightening in a way, in a very good way, so very frightening, because you could just say, hey, maybe we don't want Chinese people anymore. We'll just edit them out, right? Well, we don't need the Africans. Let's just edit them out. So there's some frightening prospects that's meant to be sold to us as we can fix this problem, we can fix that. And we have to be wary, because we know there's some very evil people, and historically that they often rise to the top. The last thing we want is them to be able to just go in and start, editing our genome. So that's CRISPR really. It's a two-edged sword, which can, can do a lot of good, or it can do a lot of harm.
What's your views on the HARP system?
I don't know enough. I've read about it in the past, but if I'm honest, I couldn't give you any good, well-based answers. I haven't looked into it enough. Sorry. So, yeah.
Could chemtrails be dishing out stuff to modify our DNA, or?
Yeah, there's no reason why, again, like I said, those retroviruses couldn't be just pumped out. Yeah. Whether an extraterrestrial wants to use that, or a human group, works the same. If someone goes in, modifies a retrovirus, thinks, okay, we want to transfer a certain upgrade or problem, but yeah, absolutely. You could, you can put these out into the atmosphere and they rain down slowly onto us. So we can be in a modification now where this stuff is being rained down on us. Also, I was a little bit curious about, when they had this object, Oumuamua, came through our solar system, a few years back. That itself may be something like one of these things that's depositing these retrovirus spores, because it's very strange that it happened to fly, through the orbital plane of the solar system between Mars and the Earth. This whole vast solar system, it comes in and it flies up between our planets and flies off. If this thing deposited some of these seeds, these metallic seeds, they'd be raining down on us by now. So it's a subject that, it's concerning. Whether it's we're doing it, they're doing it, it can certainly be underway, on both sides. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the scientists there did say that they seemed to have DNA, you know, in this red material. They didn't know what it was. They couldn't identify, you know, whether it was, you know, as a known species. You know, it seemed to be some kind of bacterium or something that was in the water droplets, but of an unknown type that carried DNA. And you're quite right. And this is, I think, some of the same guys that we mentioned earlier that, you know, were involved in this panspermia model. They also looked at this and they suspected it was some new retrovirus that had come from space. You know, some sort of bacterium that had rained down, got into obviously into the clouds and had rained down. So it may well be that this process is going on, you know, all the time. And they've said they'd like to extend our idea of the ecosystem to more of a cosmic system. And they think there is interchange between different worlds, you know, via comets, meteorites, cosmic dust. You know, all of this is going on all the time. Absolutely, yeah. Not necessarily just by deliberate aliens, you know, but they feel that it could be that there's other ways of interchange. That even the cosmic dust is supposed to have organic compounds in it. You know, so they think you have small enough particles that rain down. They're not large enough to burn up. They're raining down slowly. That, you know, it may have been ongoing interchange, yeah, over the whole period that we've been here. It's quite, yes, it's quite intriguing.
We talked about the evolution, how we've been evolving, and you said it's like it's coming to a head now with the experiment is changing. And there's been changes as well with the Earth.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's gone through changes as well. And with the solar system, like with the sun, has been giving off new sunspots, and that's changing everything.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about new energies coming in, and we're adapting to them.
Yeah.
Do you think that all of that is linked?
I do think it's linked, yeah. I think that, you know, we've seen in the last couple of solar cycles some really anomalous behaviour, and, you know, they're basically concerned, you know, they don't know whether this next one's going to be even stranger, you know, that it may be that we barely have a solar cycle in the next one, that will just be quiet. Historically, quiet times are dangerous, because that seems to be when we get these big outbursts that just come out of nowhere. On top of that, yeah, you're right, there's been other changes, and I know that, so I used to write on 2012 Mayan calendar, and I used to investigate, you know, upcoming changes in the solar system, and amongst that, you've got things like evidence possibly of galactic superwaves, which are coming in from the galactic core. And they found that dust was being moved into our solar system from space, which is one of this considered to be one of the you know, bits of evidence that suggests that's happening. There's been changes on some of the planets. I mean, I think it was Jupiter. There's changed. There's a North Pole has got a hexagonal storm like standing up on it, like it's some sort of. I'm trying to think of the word now. There's very familiar with. You put sand onto a metal board and they play frequency for it. It changes these shapes. But also Jupiter's got that going on. It's got some sort of a sound frequency that's coming out of the planet and it's producing a standing wave, a hexagonal standing wave. There's some sort of signal coming out of the planet, right? That must have that. So we've got, there's some really strange changes. Yeah. I do think, again, I think these are tied to us coming to this strange point where it's almost like the upgrades or these changes have culminated. And now there's stuff going on in our solar system, there's this strange, you know, obviously there's the ecosystem collapse that's going on. All seems to be coinciding, and now the talk of disclosure, and agents coming out, the deep state wanting to talk. Like, why? What's provoking that? You know, do they know that there's something coming where it no longer favours them to keep it secret because it's their families too, you know, or whatever? But there's some very strange things, yeah, all coinciding.
With global warming, that you've just broached on, do you think that we're going to get, I mean it's a difficult thing for you to think, but do you think we're going to get outside help from that? Because apparently we've got 12 years and counting, probably more like 11 years. The governments don't seem to be doing much, they're doing Brexit and that's all. Do you think we are going to get some, I mean if we've been looked after or grown, or it would seem really pointless just to let the planet go to the dogs?
Yeah, one of the things actually in my, one of the books can come out next year, but basically I do write in that, I'm saying that I think that there is the potential there for us to engage with these intelligences, the ones that aren't so nasty, and look for some of that help in potential. So I do think that there is the chance that we can do that. I think though that part of that, in my understanding, I think first we have to deal with the fact that it seems that our leadership and the deep state type people are already collaborating with off-world influences, in my view, who are very negative. And so other groups that are more positive are basically standing back and they're waiting to see what we do. You know, have we chosen sides already? So, to be honest, if I was them in their position, I'm not sure I'd rush in to help if I feel that humanity has chosen the enemy, right? So we have to be very careful about this. We're in a situation where we say, hang on, why aren't they helping? Why aren't they all flying in? Maybe they look and they say, well, look what you've already made science with the others. Like, we're not interested. So I think that first we have to do something about the situation we see, which we've got, you know, an evil archy running the planet. Who I consider to be a paedophile satanic elite, basically, pretty much like David Icke describes. Because you look at what's going on, it keeps going out. Strange sex cults, right? Strange, you know, elite networks, in not just the Vatican, but in governments. You know, we've had an ex-British Prime Minister indicated in occult ritual sex abuse. I mean, at what point do we say, things have gone horribly, horribly wrong? The scum has risen to the top. People are seeing them involved in occult rituals, contacting entities. What are these entities? You know, where are they coming from? I don't think that they're just fairies and sprites. You know, they're communicating with someone that offers them something, you know, that gives them power. And that this is something, you know, historically has been claimed for a very long time, that there are entities which you can contact, which will give you influence and power if you do what they want. And I think that until we sort of rise up a bit as a species and kind of choose again, you know, I'm wary as to whether the beings will come in. I think that we kind of have to, yeah, on their view, maybe it'll be a case of, well, maybe the purge is better for them, you know. So I hope that we don't go down that route. But
Who's the PM?
that was, someone can help me out, yeah. The Swindon police were investigating him, which he's dead now.
Ted Heath?
Yeah, with Ted Heath, yeah. Yeah, and it's funny.
I've spoken to him a few times.
Yeah,
He's a great sailor.
Yeah, I thought you a bit of a weird one, though, but he's a monster. Yeah, he said if he was alive today, there was enough to arrest him and questioned him.
Not the only one as well.
No. The problem is, as well, it usually doesn't come out until after they die. You know, they're protected until that point. But yeah, he's not alone. And I, you know, through people I know, you know, I know that there's a lot of that going on. You know, there's a lot of strange stuff going on. It's not just, you know, it's politics, religion, you know, all the halls of power. You've got these people, these, you know, well, they look like people. I mean, this is, so yeah, I mean that's you know, that's another issue. Yeah.
Isn't global warming our fault for pollution?
I have mixed views about that, because if we are being influenced all the time.
Pollution.
Well, I'm not saying there's no pollution, right, but if we are always being influenced by outside intelligences, how much of anything is just our fault, right? So are some of these things happening because they are of interest to other intelligences? For example, let's just say our environment is great for us, but maybe it's not great for someone else. Maybe they would like to terraform this planet, right?
Get us to do it.
So you think, yeah, they get us to do it. Say, well, we don't really like the amount of, you know, CO2 you've got. We don't like the way your oceans are. Can you just modify it for us? You know, we'll have you know, consume this, do that, and it will change to how we want it to be. I think so. We have to be wary. Is it just our fault? I do think that we are doing. Certainly, we're polluting the seas. You know, we're throwing the plastic in the seas. We're cutting down the rainforest. There's no argument that there's not a problem. So it's what says, you know, the total deniers, I think, is ludicrous, right? But I think the problem is way bigger than just, say, CO2, you know, because obviously we know that we're going to kill the phytoplankton in the ocean. We've lost something like 80% of insect populations at this point. Now, I don't know how you restore insect population. If you lose an insect, it's extinct, it's gone, right? So, now what they're calling this is an upward trophic cascade. And I think that's a term you're going to hear more of in the next couple of years, because what happens is, of course, the smaller animals that eat the insects, they're dying off. We're losing all the birds. We're losing all of the little shrews and all these. They're dying off because they've got no food. What eats them? You know, you've got your things like your foxes, your badgers, you know, the equivalents around the world. They're dying off. And there's a point where that cascade hits, where it's like, oh, it's us, right? And so these, and I don't know whether we can reverse that without help. I'll be totally honest. Looking at that, I'm thinking.
Apparently, the male chromosome is getting dwindled out anyway. Yeah.
There's been a lot of damage to the other human chromosome. I mean, we are suffering from multiple directions in the human chromosome. You know, we're being damaged by, obviously, things we eat, water, pollutants, you know, everything.
It seems to be the male chromosome. I've read a few things about that being affected more than the female.
Well, certainly we know that there's definitely problems in male fertility rates and all sorts of problems. It does seem that in some way men are more vulnerable to some of these outside influences. It's hard to pinpoint one cause because of the fact we know there's so many things at the moment that are wrong. But again, I question whether this is just us. I think, you know, if we have influence at the highest levels, you know, there's some of these people who on TV they look like a normal person. What is a human? At this point I'm sort of a bit, on the fence, but I can just say, well, it looks like a human, it's a human. What's inside? Isn't that what makes the difference? Because if you think like a monster, like you're a monster, right? If you think like a normal person who's compassionate, you care about people, you care about the planet, you care about your kids, like you're a normal kind of human. But I don't think that we're really dealing with the human minds when we deal with some of these people. And I saw today, like, for example, this is not quite as extreme, but I'm sure most people saw that the burning of the church of Notre Dame was on fire. The thing that got me is that they wanted us to clap our hands about that these billionaires all came crawling out of the woodwork saying, "Oh, we've got hundreds of millions for that. Don't worry, we'll fix it all." What about for all those kids, those starving kids and that? They want us to clap. "Oh, you're fixing an old building. Oh, well done." What about the kids you step over on the way to work? So these people are monsters, right? So for me, they're not humans. What do they look like? They're monsters.
In his feature, you talked about the Pleiades race.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel about the Edward case? What happened in the
Yeah, it's pretty intriguing. Mixed views. It certainly seems like the Secret Services and people were interested in the case. Obviously he seems to have produced a glut of evidence, but some of it to me doesn't quite stack up. So I'd say that there's definitely, I think, something going on. I don't think anyone would dedicate so much of their life to the claims that they have contact, and to all these pictures and consistently going with that for their whole life if it was totally made up. Because I don't see that it's worth it, saying I'm going to make my whole life about aliens that are not real or that I didn't meet. So I think something was happening, but I do think there's some spin that went into it, and that I'm quite dubious about some of his pictures, and all of that. I think he had some contact.
recorded sounds as well that we can't.
Yeah. Definitely I think there was some contact, some paranormal stuff going on, but I'm a bit sceptical on that it's all real. I think that there's been stuff gone in there that's not right. That's my view on it.
Do you think they were trying to discredit him? There's such a strong case.
Mm-hmm.
Pictures, sounds. Do you think that he was coming too close to the ball and they thought, discrediting him?
Well, it's funny that the Secret Services took an interest at all, isn't it? You sort of wonder if they just thought there's no aliens or there's nothing to this. Why do they care about it? Why did they get involved? Why were they having agents go and investigate? So clearly somebody, in those halls of power thought, hey, hang on a minute. Some of this runs close to the truth. This is stuff we know. Go and see what this guy's doing. So, it does muddy the water. It's hard to know. But yeah, I think that the fact that they were interested suggests that they were thinking something is going on here. Like I say, then it becomes difficult to separate fact from fiction, because there's obviously the disinfo involved, and then there's obviously characters in the story who have their own self-interests, and it becomes like all ufology, all the law and all these events, they become very hard to distinguish the fact from the fiction, don't they? Because over time, obviously, we get different people's claims on what happened. Some of the evidence stacks up, some of it gets debunked. So yeah, it's very difficult with that. And I'll say that I haven't explored the whole wealth of his material, so I couldn't give it completely fair credit. I couldn't say if I absolutely knew if it was real or not real. I do find that his descriptions, perhaps of the Pleiadians, in terms of the entities he describes and the way they behave, some of the things they say to him, is different to what we have looked at, what we've had, and what Valerie's information. There's definitely differences. And also with the entire thing of Pleiadians, bear in mind, I take a position that there is no evolution of complex life in the Pleiades. So when people say, all these beings come from Maya, or they come from they'll say, oh, they're on this. I don't really agree with that. My perspective is, as they've explained, through this information, that yes, they came through a stargate, which is located in that region, to here. So when they've explained to people where they come from, they've gone, oh, from there, Pleiades. But you don't need to start going, well, we're from this trillions of light years away system, it's got no name for you, but it's that star beyond that sun. The simple thing in it is to go, well, the Pleiades, yeah, we arrived here from the Pleiades. And it keeps it simple. Because also you've got multiple different kinds of beings that are saying we're Pleiadians, right? People meet different ones. They say, yeah, we're Pleiadians, we're from the Pleiades. They don't look the same, right? There's different groups. And again, that's what you just described in Valerie's work, is that you've got multiple beings on this colony ship, and they're completely different. I mean, one of them is, some of them are actually crystalline entities in robotic kind of suits that are on board the craft. Others of them are golden-skinned beings that, with light coming out. It's really, it's a mixed crew. And they definitely don't all originate in one place. So I think there's another level of complexity, and that again makes more sense because we know that the Pleiades is basically very young to have complex life, and that's always been an issue that the mainstream have taken up. So, well, if you've got these Pleiadians, how come that system's too young? And I think that answers that. They say, well, look, we do come via that, but there's a web of stargates, and that's the jump point to Earth.
A stargate presumably being an event horizon.
Yeah, some kind of white hole or some such thing. And we now know as well, in just the last few weeks, that a team of researchers looking at black holes has uncovered that if you have a sufficiently large rotating black hole, they believe a craft can pass through it with absolutely no damage to the craft. Right? So here we go. We're at the point now where we're actually accepting that stargates and stuff are real.
Right, okay, we've hit 10:30, I think. It's time we have to regrettably wrap things up for tonight.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Bruce hasn't actually mentioned he's got